The story of rape, how race and gender can affect the media's depiction of a rape crime.
From swimming standout to sex offender, Brock Turner's fall from grace was as spectacular as it was complete. There were sobs of anguish and relief from opposite sides of the courtroom as the jury's verdict was read. Guilty on all counts, including attempted sexual assault and the penetration of someone who was either unconscious or too intoxicated to give consent.
Sam Ukwuachu sat quietly in a Texas courtroom this week as a jury convicted him of sexual assault. The explanation for the scandal lies partly in his past. Early 2013, Ukwuachu, a freshman All-American defensive end, is dismissed from the Boise State football team after a confrontation with a girlfriend. So in May of that year, he transfers to Baylor University, nearly 1,700 miles away in his home state of Texas. Baylor's head coach Art Briles now says he knew nothing of the problems of Ukwuachu's past.
Hi, my name is Calvin, and I'm studying aerospace engineering. I think most everyone has recognized that there's been a huge uproar nationwide about rape culture in recent years. Head athletic directors and even chancellors have been asked to step down from their positions because of the way they have dealt with these situations with sexual assault. Even campus police have dealt with these sexual assault situations incorrectly. Most notably, assailants of a certain race, economic status, and membership to a successful college athletic team have been given more leniency by the university staff and lighter punishments in the court of law, according to their crime.
Hi, I'm Katie Spieth and I'm studying environmental engineering. So basically in this video, we don't necessarily want to look at how a person's economic status or their race affected the actual outcome of the case, but instead we're going to look at how the media coverage depicted the victims and assailants through their use of words, through the pictures they included in the piece, etc.
Throughout the video, we will refer back to our guideline research questions and try to answer them with evidential support. We will also analyze a few related studies that show gender and race can play a significant role in the media's depiction of crime. So here are our guided research questions. How were the rapists described by the media? How were the victims described by the media? What type of pictures were included in media coverage of the incidents? How often is the perpetrator / victim a male versus female, black versus white? How do other rape cases relate to these two cases in terms of the way crimes were depicted by media? How do these two particular cases relate to one another?
So the first case we're going to look at is the case of Sam Ukwuachu. Ukwuachu was a football player at Boise State University from 2011 to 2013. However, he was asked to leave this school due to personal issues, which included being abusive with a girlfriend. After arriving at Baylor University in 2013, he was convicted of assaulting a college athlete. The sentence he was given for this crime was 6 months in jail, 400 hours of community service, 10 years of felony probation, and registering as a sex offender. However, media coverage quickly moved away from focusing on this crime to the environment of Baylor's football club. The coaches, team representatives dismissed these accusations, so this was considered controversial, but they were eventually found guilty in court, and the head coach and athletic director were asked to leave.
We did notice that less mainstream and local news sources, such as Waco Tribune, were much less careful in the language they used to describe the people involved in the case. For example, quote, "While watching TV in his room, the 5'2" woman said that aggressive 6'4" Ukwuachu started making moves." This was an unnecessary amount of detail about the victim and perpetrator. These days, almost anybody can share their feelings on social media, and social media is fairly easy to get a hold of. This poses a whole new challenge in informing the public about accurate details of criminal cases, because less informed individuals can interpret these blogging sites as legitimate.
So an example of a more legitimate coverage of this incident is an article included in the New York Times opinion pages. This article was written by Joe Nasario, and basically the beginning half of the article, he focuses a lot on describing the victim, which included saying Jane Doe was a virgin. But after that point, the focus of the article largely revolves around Ken Starr's administration. In conclusion, Mr. Nasario makes this statement: "Indeed, judging by the Ukwuachu case, It's not so much the athletes who need to have their behavior monitored, it's Ken Starr's administration. In my personal opinion, the story is focusing on the predominantly white coaching staff and the administration of Baylor, and barely touching on how the rape culture within the university's student body is also a problem.
In the Brock Turner case, the rape victim didn't expect the assailant to take this crime to trial due to its obvious outcome. However, once the trial was over, Brock left with a sentence of 6 months in jail and a 3-year probationary period for raping an unconscious female victim. In turn, the media decided to direct most of its focus on the fact that Brock Turner's 6 months sentence will be cut in half by California law. Similarly, the media strongly focused on Brock Turner being put in protective custody as sexual predators are targeted by other inmates.
The New York Times is easily one of the most respected and widely read newspapers in the U.S. and abroad. I noticed right away how careful they were with their wording to describe both the victim and the perpetrator. In the articles entitled Judge Aaron Persky Under Fire for Sentencing in Stanford Rape Case and Court Papers Give Insight into the Stanford Sexual Assault, Mr. Turner is described on multiple occasions as a champion swimmer, a star swimmer, and a champion swimmer and Olympic hopeful. It's interesting how often they use his athletic accomplishments to describe him as opposed to other physical traits, or simply calling him a student at Stanford. Another interesting article came from the New York Daily News. This article compares Mr. Turner's case to that of Corey Bailey. Corey Bailey also raped an unconscious female, but he was given the minimum mandatory sentence of 15 to 25 years. This article tries to argue that race clearly affected the outcome of these cases. However, national news articles and television reports as of late have focused more on the judge and on Turner's personal history, rather than comparing these two very similar cases with very different outcomes.
I'm not sure if most people noticed this, but originally when Brock Turner's trial went public, the picture included in most of the news stories was that of him in a suit and him smiling. According to the New York Magazine and CrimeFeed.com, Brock Turner's first mugshot was taken on January 18th of 2015. When he was initially arrested, but it wasn't until June 6, 2016 that his first mugshot was released to the public from the local police department. On the other hand, Waco Tribune claims that Sam Ukwuachu's mugshot was released a day after his court appearance on the 18th of August. This was almost immediately after getting arrested. Why is that? Is it because it didn't want to harm Brock's chances of becoming an Olympic athlete? Sam Ukwuachu was in line to becoming an outstanding collegiate athlete as well. The media shouldn't hide these truths about these situations, even if they might ruin a career. Specifically, the media shouldn't have these types of time differences on mugshot releases, as mugshots play a large role in how the public perceives a criminal.
Another interesting result is when searching images on Google for Brock Turner and Sam Ukwuachu, Brock Turner's photos are mostly of him smiling or while he was in the pool wearing medals around his neck. However, those of Sam Ukwuachu are mostly his mugshot or when he was crying in court when his sentence was read.
Similarly, on June 15th, I did some research on Google and I found some pretty interesting things. When I searched Brock Turner, 7 of the 10 initial search results weren't about his sexual convictions, but they were about his swimming career, people defending him, and the judge making an incorrect decision on the case. When I searched Sam Ukwuachu, only 2 of the 10 initial search results weren't about his sexual convictions. Turner and Ukwuachu's cases are similar in that both were collegiate athletes. However, the comparison stops there. Turner's case has become the case of the year in highlighting rape culture, but this might be very much a result of his race in a higher class in society. In Ukwuachu's case, the crime was quickly related to another rape that occurred with a Baylor University football player, and the coverage by various news outlets focused more on the institution that allowed this to happen and not on the perpetrator and victim's individual stories.
So in the second half of this video, we'd like to discuss 2 different scholarly sources that we feel pertain very well to the Brock Turner and Sam Ukwuachu case. So in her study entitled Race, Riches, and Reporters, Dr. Koss examined 14 different magazine articles. The magazines that she took these articles from were Newsweek, Time, Sports Illustrated, and People. And basically within these articles, she looked for the word selection, the level of data supplied about the crime, and whether they use identified rape myths or themes. Examples of this that she explains in her paper are the vamp rape narrative, which puts a lot of blame on the victim, and the virgin rape narrative, where a lot of blame is put on the perpetrator. In the introduction of her paper, Dr. Koss says, quote, "The media's rape narratives affect how people think of rape, and reactions to these rape narratives possibly perpetrate stereotypes and misconceptions." She found that in many past studies, if the victim was of a lower class or a minority as compared to a higher class white assailant, more blame was attributed to the victim for the crime. She also talks about how media can sometimes affect the judicial process and sentencing as well. Quote, "If media articles advance narratives that are incomplete, inaccurate, or focus attention on irrelevant details, the public and jurors drawn from that public may overlook the real issues surrounding rape and make unfair judgments." So I'd like to read for you all some of the findings from this study. It appeared that the magazine article's statements placed offenders 61% of the time in a better light than the victim at 39% of the time. In this case, of course, the offenders were white and of a higher class in society versus the victim, who was a minority from a lower class of society. However, the blame statements and the statements casting the parties in a negative light were pretty dead even. So I think this shows that although the blame statements and language that may put someone in a darker light were pretty dead even, the overall blame was attributed more to the victim in this case than the perpetrators. So in conclusion to our discussion about this particular study, Dr. Koss noticed that most often the descriptors of characters were more fair than in past studies, with less usage of identified rape themes or harmful language. However, she did notice that there tended to be too much detail about what happened before or after the crime, and she says this is a bad thing because often the public can interpret these other details surrounding the case and interpret them as casual factors for why the rape occurred, which can help perpetrate rape myths. She also explains there are many limitations to this study because she only looked at one high-profile case. So in this study, Ms. Jackson looks at the story of Megan Williams, who was assaulted, raped, and tortured by white perpetrators. She was a black victim in 2007. She basically looked at the coverage of this event by 4 major news channels. This included NBC, ABC, CNN, and Fox. She noted that broadcast networks NBC and ABC only reported 2 brief stories on the event, which was significant given the amount of time these channels spent on the rape crimes of white victims such as Lacey Peterson and Natalie Holloway, and tended to use sensational language to describe the event, further downplaying the occurrence of such an event. The cable news channels had very different results. CNN presented 32 stories on this case during the time period Ms. Jackson studied the events, whereas Fox mentioned it twice while sandwiching the story between, quote, 2 prolonged accounts of racial violence that focused on white male victims and black male perpetrators. CNN also downplayed the factor of race while describing the class of the individuals often. Overall, she noticed that there was a lack of diversity in those people interviewed on all of the television shows about the events, twice as many white than black sources, and about 4 times as many male as female sources. I'd like to conclude this part of our discussion with a quote from Ms. Jackson. "Despite the increased visibility of people of color and women in the news, the acceptance and perpetration of worldviews that reinforce race, class, and gender privilege while disregarding the experiences of marginalized members of our society remains the norm."
In conclusion, we think that descriptive terminology and phrasing techniques of events in modern news reportings have greatly improved over the past decade. This was supported by the Duke lacrosse case and the Megan Williams studies. In both of these studies, it was found that descriptions of characters involved were careful to avoid rape myths and themes. However, depending on the specific news network or magazine, more coverage or less coverage of the news outlets tend to have more biased tones in their pieces. Especially in the cases of Brock Turner and Sam Ukwuachu, the pure coverage of the case involving an all-white male cast was far greater than the one involving a minority as the perpetrator.
Finally, we want to talk about some proposed solutions we've come up with
for reducing racial and gender bias in the coverage of rape crimes. There should be even coverage within a network for all those stories involving predominantly all white or well-privileged characters versus minority and or lower class assailants and victims. Continued avoidance of the use of rape myths. Reports should be as objective as possible with descriptions of the characters and events involved. Include interviews and have narrators of the story from a diverse background, i.e. not all white male contributors. Coverage of less sensational news such as rapes involving celebrities and athletes. And as a consumer of news, read and watch the coverage from multiple news outlets.